Well, hello everyone. Pleasure to be with you today. I joined a few minutes late. I apologize for that. It was a mix-up on my end. So I didn't hear the introductory comments, but I'm going to do my best to engage immediately in the conversation. I'm going to give you today a condensed version of a presentation that some of your WWF colleagues have had in longer form in a couple of brown bags that I've given over the course of the last few years. And the focus of those has been on the intersection between the visualization of complex information and strategy and strategic decision making, which is a sweet spot of some of the work of my consultancy, TRUTHstudio, which is largely a strategy consultancy, but with a specialty in making complex information visual to support better strategy. And I've done quite a bit of work over the years with WWF as an organization in that capacity. Let's just make sure. So my basic thesis is that visualization can play an important role in supporting strategy, particularly because visualization of a complex system can support understanding of system relationships, which enables prioritization of leverage points, which can guide action toward achieving goals. That's the conceptual frame for all of the work that I do in this space, and it's going to be the frame for this presentation. But the real title of this presentation is Guidelines for Good Graphics, and I've shared with the organizers of this event a two-page that is a double-sided 8.5 by 11 handout that is a good condensed version of this presentation in paper form, which I've designed as a kind of reference for professionals like yourselves who are working in environments where you're dealing with complex systems, you're needing to analyze those systems, make sense of them, and often communicate about those complex systems to non-specialist audiences. And so the guidelines that I'm presenting are kind of the wisdom that I've been able to accumulate over the past 10, 15 years in doing that kind of work. So they're a kind of do-it-yourself version of the kind of consulting that I do on a professional capacity for organizations like WWF. So this is what the handout looks like. I don't know if you already have it or you'll receive it after this presentation, but I'm going to be walking through the 10 key recommendations that I have for you when you're thinking about visualization and strategy. And to start off with, I'm going to, in a way, piggyback on the prior presentation and say that in most of the work that I do, there are two different ways that visualization is supporting strategy. One is a kind of exploratory mode or an analytical mode in which visualization is being used to support our strategy. That is, you might be using visualization to support internally WWF's strategy development. WWF's understanding of system relationships.
There's a guy now going through 10 guidelines for graphics for
in order to guide WWF's action. I think somebody muted me, but I think it's somebody else who needs to be muted. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good. Keep going.
Okay, good. So just as an example from my own work, and I'm not going to talk a lot about my own projects, I'll just use them as examples of these key points. As an example of an exploratory visualization that I've been working on for a number of years as a research project, I'm going to show you some images from a project called Economy Map, which is an attempt to take some very large US Department of Commerce data sets, merge them with what are called economic input-output lifecycle assessment data sets to create a data set that connects economic demand with environmental impacts throughout the US economy. And Economy Map was my attempt to make those large data sets visual. You don't need to understand everything about this spaghetti, but generally speaking, what you're seeing on the right hand of your screen is the components of economic demand that drive the US economy. The largest block, that largest gray block, is private households, then government is the skinny block, and then export, the slightly wider block at the bottom. And that combination of household, government, and export demand is driving all of the supply chains in the economy, which are represented by that spaghetti, and ultimately driving over on the left, in this case, land use change impacts, with up in the top, I'm not sure if you're able to read the text, but the feed grains sector, meat animal sector, meat packing sector, and sausages sector generating the most impacts either indirectly or directly. And economy map is kind of a way to see those connections and see which sectors are generating impacts directly, which are generating impacts indirectly. Same for, say, freshwater impacts. Not surprisingly, the cotton and textile supply chain and the food and ag supply chain generating the most freshwater impacts. An economy map is allowing you to drill in on which specific sectors within, say, cotton and textiles or food and ag are generating those impacts directly and which are really inheriting those impacts indirectly. So as you can see, it's messy in a way, it's complex. It's not something you'd want to show to a non-technical audience, but as a strategist, it allows you to drill in and understand how the system is working for the purposes of then starting to explain through an explanatory visualization to others how the system's working in order to support others' understanding of system relationships, enabling others' prioritization of leverage points, and guiding others' action to achieve shared goals. So example, I know WWF works significantly with the private sector. So working with individual companies or groups of companies to help them understand why they should take action based on what we've learned about where the key environmental impacts are on a sectoral basis. And that produces visualizations more like this, which is still complex, but which allows a summary. And I won't walk you all the way through it, but what this is showing is that there are 8 key supply chains that are generating across the 13 environmental impact categories in the model. So those are the different colors, between a total of 50 and 99% of the total estimated environmental impacts in the US economy. So it's pulling a lot of information out of that model and then summarizing it in a way that you could put it in front of a colleague in another organization and start talking about where a partnership might be built based on these intersections. So that brings me to the first guideline for good graphics, which is to be clear on your purpose, whether your purpose is to understand, that is to explore, or to influence, that is to explain. And I would say there's really a third E that the prior presentation spoke to, which is engage, which I think some of the game-based visualizations are doing more in the engage space. It's not a space in which I work as actively, so I don't really include it in this presentation. And I'm going to start now going quickly through other guidelines. Second guideline is to create a hierarchy of messages and information. This is particularly in an explanatory visualization. This graphic is from a report that WWF collaborated on called the 3% Solution that was looking to communicate to the private sector the opportunity to both gain significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time either save or make money in the process across a number of sectors of the economy. I'm not going to go into the details of the graphic, but the point is that the primary messages, which are over on the right in the slide, that is the overall scale of reduction and the 3% annual reduction between 2010 and 2020 is necessary in order to meet IPCC targets. Those primary messages should be visible even if you're viewing this graphic from across the room. Not unlike the way that if you view a road map of the United States, you can see the shape of the US and you can see the major interstate highways. And as you move closer to the graphic and look at it in more detail, you can start to get access to a secondary level of information, the actual level of gigaton reduction targets for this report, the ratio of avoid emissions, et cetera, and then moving to a third level, which is the smallest typeface and the highest level of detail, the tertiary pieces of information that you may want to communicate, but wouldn't be visible if you viewed this from across the room. So that second guideline is to make sure that as you create graphics, the top messages are the ones that are most visible, even if you stand far away from the graphic. Third is emphasizing the information, not the units or labels or axes. What I'm showing you here is a graphic from a report from NRDC on food waste. On the left was the original graphic, on the right is what I think is an improved graphic. And the point here is that in the original graphic, the titles of the graphic and the places where waste was happening, production losses, post-harvest processing over on the left, were given more visual weight than the data itself, which is the waste. Whereas over on the right, those black bars are showing you where in different supply chains waste is occurring. So the most visually powerful aspect of the visual is the information itself, the data itself. third guideline, and I know I'm going fast, but you have the handout to come back to, is to match data variables to visual variables. That is, for each of the variables in whatever you're presenting, in this case, there are different countries and there are different volumes of production per country. We're using the text to identify the country together with color. So green is always Indonesia. Wherever you see green, you know that's Indonesia. And size, that is how much of the circle is occupied, is volume of production or consumption. So size always reflects volume. Making sure that color, that is one of the visual variables, always represents the same thing, in this case country, and size always represents volume, will help your viewers to understand your graphics. I'm not going to talk in detail about this slide, but this is just emphasizing that point. Fifth point is to iterate, iterate, iterate. That is, try lots of different options in order to settle on the right one. This is all I'm doing here, is trying a lot of different ways to show the score for different countries in Latin America on the health performance of their reefs, the reef that's off the coast of these respective countries. And the challenge was to design a way of representing that performance that was both technically accurate, but also politically safe, because this is such a contentious issue that the activists working on this were worried that if they were too obvious about how poorly some countries were performing, they might actually physically get hurt or killed on the basis of this report. So it was playing those options off one another to find what's the way to represent this information and try a lot of stuff to get that to happen. Sixth, create a consistent vocabulary across a project. This speaks to using color for the same thing across the project, using size, but also making sure that as you step through slides, and I'm just showing you sample slides from a presentation, that the only thing that changes as you step through the slide, as you go from one slide to the next, is the thing that you want to emphasize. And again, this deck will be available to you. That's why I'm going so fast. This is another example from the Carnegie Endowment of a set of slides to talk about how our oil future is changing as new, dirtier types of oil are becoming more available. And again, what I'm highlighting is, as I step the slides forward, I'm trying to not to have very much change in the slide except the new information, so that your eye isn't distracted by the title, the location of the title changing, for instance, but only the new information that's coming onto the slide being what changes. Guideline number 7 is to combine visual information where possible. On the left is the original PowerPoint that was produced collaboratively by WWF and some of its other partners in putting together the data for the 3% solution report. And there's a lot of redundancy in those original graphics, and we tried to compress those graphics and eliminate the redundancy so that a single graphic could do all of the work. The 8th guideline is to focus information design where it counts. In this case, I was originally hired to design the entire report for the reef performance 2011 eco audit of the Mesoamerican reef countries, the project I referenced earlier. And the budget was very small. They gave me a small budget to redesign an entire report. And I came back to them and said, look, I think you'd be better served by me designing a poster and you guys going with a really vanilla design for your report, because that will be a more powerful use of your funds. So figuring out where you're going to allocate your resources to get the most bang for your buck on the visualizations that you do, whether it's a single graphic or a single poster or 2 signature graphics within a report, and letting the rest of the report be really simple in its design. Number 9, specify your needs, priorities, and audiences. And this came up in the prior presentation. Broadly speaking, for 2-dimensional design, the kind of design that I tend to specialize in, you might want graphic design where the designer is looking to make something beautiful. And WWF does a really great job with producing a lot of beautiful design. You might also want infographics where the designer will work to make the information hip or hipster or exciting or interesting to a younger, more online savvy audience. And then you might want also information design where the designer is working to make the information true. That is, when you look at the graphic, it gives you accurate access to the underlying data. And that's the type of visualization that I tend to specialize in. And then finally, learn from existing examples. There are great online resources out there, new resources coming online all the time that can help to both educate you in the science of information design and also give you examples of how others are representing information. And that's always my first stop in any project, is to look at how others are trying to visualize the same type of information. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and happy to answer questions.
Jason, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Katie, and this question's been bumped by Samantha and Alison as well. Katie, do you want to jump in and put your question to Jason?
Yeah, sure. Can everyone hear me?
Sure can.
I'm wondering what recommended software or other programs could be used to produce these kinds of visualizations.
Great question.
And also, thank you so much for that presentation. It was great.
Absolutely. So for much of what I've shown you, the software program called Tableau that many of you may already have access to, there is a free version available but I think WWF also invests in the professional version for some of its work. Tableau is a great platform for a lot of the kinds of visuals that I've shown you, though none of this work was done on Tableau, mainly because it was done before Tableau was robust enough to deliver the kind of results that I would want out of it. But for your uses, I would say Tableau is great. There are always new online software coming available that allows you to do particular things. Like some people like to do Sankey diagrams, and there are a number of which are kind of flow diagrams. There are a number of online free Sankey graph programs and a paid version, eSankey. But Tableau is kind of a go-to. And then I do a lot of work in PowerPoint, and it's possible to do a lot of work in PowerPoint. And I do that because I'm handing materials to clients, and I want clients to be able to work with that material. And pretty much everybody has access to PowerPoint. The trick is to ignore all of the default settings and to remove all of the included templates from PowerPoint and then build from scratch. And if you build from scratch, you can do beautiful things, but you just have to ignore what Microsoft thinks is beautiful design. And then finally, for those of you who have access to Adobe Illustrator, that's a very powerful piece of software for doing really finely tuned graphics, and many of the final graphics that I showed you were done in Illustrator. The free version of that is Inkscape, which is an open source two-dimensional vector-based design program that you can do a lot with Inkscape that you can do also with Illustrator. Illustrator is just a little bit more powerful, so if you have it in-house, it's preferred.